Hello dear subscribers and watchers, how are things on your side? This is me again, Saidelia here from Computer Science for Self-Taught. As I've promised you before in the previous tutorials that I will make a tutorial about SQLite database and how to use it in Android, and now your dreams have come true. We will cover each and everything about SQLite in this tutorial, and you'll learn everything from zero to hero in my tutorials. So make sure that you subscribe us if you're new to this channel and hit the bell icon for getting the latest videos. In this video we'll talk about SQLite database, the database which helps you storing multiple records, as it might be possible that you're recording high scores or saving chat. I'll demonstrate the database operations and perform database query to create a database and add tables to it and pre-populate it with the data, all with the help of SQLite Open Helper, which is a class that manages our database inside the Android, which allows us to create the database, open the database for us, and manage our query. So these are the contents that I'm gonna discuss in this tutorial. What is SQLite database? Is it something like MySQL that you run it inside a server, or like many other databases that it has its own server? We will cover about this. And after that we will see how to make query using SQLite database. Before we continue this session, I assume that you all familiar with the databases, as in general SQLite uses a standard SQL find structure query language, and you must also be familiar with SQL databases like MySQL, PostgreSQL, or Oracle, SQL Server, or many other most famous databases. You must be familiar in order to know this, and I will refresh all the database concepts you already know in this tutorial. So what is SQLite database or SQLite database? It is a relational database which is open source, so you can use it for free. And the main reason for using the database is it is a lightweight database which is created specially to work with mobile app applications. SQLite uses SQL, a structured query language, which is a language designed for managing data in relational databases. Because SQLite is a scaled down version of MySQL, PostgreSQL, and other popular database systems. By the scaled down version, I mean that it is the smaller version of MySQL, PostgreSQL, and other popular database systems. And bear in mind that SQLite or SQLite doesn't support triggers. And that's why I say that it is the scaled down version of many other most famous databases. Because SQLite database stores the structured data in a private database safely. The data gets stored in the table format, which contains several rows and columns, just like we have it in Excel spreadsheet, where your Excel spreadsheet there are several columns, and inside one column there are many cells, and you put your data inside that cell. And each application has its own SQLite database. This database is accessible by any class in the app, but not by others. Whenever you create the schema or the structure of your database by your app, only your app is allowed to work with the database. Other apps will not access to the database that have been created by your app. Field is nothing but it is an intersection of row and column, which is something like this. We call them field. If I demonstrate a table for you so you can understand it well. Okay, imagine that this is your table and your table has a unique name. I'm going to name my table as table _ P. Okay, every table has a name and each column has a unique value, and each value inside each field is identified or uniquely identified by ID, which is this one. And all these fields are called field, which is intersection of rows and column. These fields contain data, or it might reference to other fields as well, like ID references to name, which uniquely identifies the name and also uniquely identifies the address. Or this ID or this field may be referenced to other tables, as is the concept of foreign keys. These are rows are uniquely identified by IDs, okay, which is this one, which is incremented by itself, 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth. And these column names are unique per table. Make sure that you do not put the same column name for your table. Once again, if I cover what I have said, SQLite is a serverless, and thus you don't need to install any server to work with SQLite. And it follows the ACID properties. Any database which follows the ACID properties, it is transactional in nature. Which is ACID is the acronym for the atomicity, consistency, isolation, and durability. We will discuss them in the upcoming slides what are these acronyms of ACID. And bear in mind that SQLite or SQLite uses SQL engine and it does not support triggers. Make sure that you Google it, which other things are in other databases. SQLite doesn't support it. It is a straightforward and versatile database. So this is your table, and each table, as I've told you before, has a name, some columns, and some fields or cells for providing your data, and each row is uniquely identified by a unique ID, which is this one. As you can see, if there is alpha, so it is uniquely identified by the ID of 1. There is no repetition in this sequence, and I recommend that your table should have a single integer primary key column called ID. A primary key is designated to the table column, which uniquely identify all the table records because it contains a unique value for each row of the data. And bear in mind that it should not be left answered that SQLite that you're using in your phone is a single user and it doesn't support multi-user, which other databases support it. And it is considered as a local database and doesn't require any server in the background or backend. As I've told you before, Android comes with built-in SQLite embedded in the device, so you don't need to require any external libraries or set of procedures. Use SQLite with the Android application, as it is a scaled-down version of many other popular databases, because SQLite implements SQL database engines that is self-contained, serverless, zero configuration, and transactional. Self-contained means that it doesn't require other components like MySQL. When you want to work with MySQL database, so you need to install a server in your computer. Before working with SQL, you must turn on the server, wait for some time so the server gets on and prepare itself. But in SQLite, you don't need to install anything. It is self-contained or standalone because it has less dependencies to work with. If you have used SQL Server, so you must use the Windows servers installed in your computer. If you're working with MySQL, so you must install a local server like WAMP or XAMPP in your computer in order to work with MySQL. But SQLite doesn't need those components because it is self-contained. It is the aim of the self-contained. And the next one is serverless. It doesn't require any server at the backend, so you don't need to install WAMP or XAMPP like those servers in your computer in order to work with SQLite. The only thing you need to do is just start working and start interacting with the database itself. It is serverless. Zero configuration. Doesn't need to be configured for your application. You don't need to configure SQLite before using it. Change the ports for your SQLite or do many other configurations in order your app can interact with the SQLite. It is zero configuration. You just need to install it and start working with it. And it is transactional in nature. By the transactions in here, we mean the chains must follow the ACID property. As I've told you before, ACID is nothing but it is an acronym. It stands for atomicity, consistency, isolation, and durability. This means every update, insert, delete, and count or select operations in ACID and other queries, it is transactional in nature, which means the chains must follow the ACID property. ACID is nothing but it is an acronym. It stands for atomicity, consistency, isolation, and durability. This means every update, insert, and delete operation is ACID, because running the database operations inside the transactions ensures that all the chains either occur completely or not at all. So there is no midway of getting the chance of losing the data. Even if for any reason an error occurs and the transaction is unable to complete, the system should return to a state before the transaction was started. As I've told you, it is transactional in nature, which means if anything goes wrong, things are rolled back. So these are the properties of SQLite database, which is self-contained, requires no other components, serverless, requires no server in the backend to start working with SQLite, and zero configuration. You don't need to configure the SQLite database in order to work with it, and it is transactional in nature. So now what is transaction? A transaction is nothing but it is a sequence of operations performed as a single logical unit of work that either occur completely or not at all. So there is no midway of getting the chance of losing data. So these logical unit of works or transactions which you're using inside SQLite must support or must follow the four properties of ACID. These properties are atomicity, consistency, isolation, and durability. Atomicity property identifies that either either the transaction completely full or not at all, which means either all of its data modifications are performed or none of them are performed. Consistency is all about the system state, which means if the transaction completes successful, then all the changes will have been properly made, even if the system crashes or you're running out of power. Isolation will ensure that each transaction is unaware of other transactions, which means if there are two concurrent transactions running at the same time, their modifications must be isolated from each other. Durability is a state that ensures that once a transaction has been successfully completed, all the changes it has made to the system are permanent. So these are the four properties of ACID which every relational database supports it. We'll discuss about them in the upcoming slide in details about these acronyms. As I've told you about the transaction, I'm going to rehearse myself. All changes within a single transaction in SQLite either occur completely or not at all, even if the act of writing the change out interrupted by program crash, operating system crash, or power failure. All or nothing. Running the database operations inside the transactions ensures that all the changes either occur completely or not at all, so there is no midway of getting the chance of losing the data. Even if for any reason an error occurs and the transaction is unable to complete, the system should return to the state before the transaction was started. Error could be any: the program stopped responding, operating system crash, or power failure. So that's why I say that it is amazingly stable, which means that every change within the database works in the transaction. Either you work the delete and zero update. These queries works in the transactions within the database. That will be done either completely or not at all, but doesn't leave it half done. So let's see and now learn about ACID in details. First is automaticity. Automaticity says that either all of its data modifications are performed or none of them are performed. So if a transaction starts working or inserting something to your database or modify some value in the field, so it must be completed. It must not leave it half done if the system crashes or the power failure or many other errors. And consistency indicates that when a transaction is completed, the transaction must leave all the data in a consistent state. And isolation says that modifications which are made by concurrent transactions are nothing. Two or many n number of transactions are running at the same time, and these transactions must be isolated from the modifications made by any other concurrent transaction. A transaction either recognizes the data in the state it was in before another concurrent transaction modified it, or it recognizes the data after the second transaction has completed, but bear in mind that it does not recognize an intermediate state. So what is durability? Durability says that after the transaction has completed, its effects are permanently in place in the system. The modifications persist even in the event of a system failure. So these are the ACID properties that you have to bear in mind. It is an acronym for automaticity, consistency, isolation, and durability. So you can pause the video and study these sentences by yourself. Let's see how we can perform database operations by running queries. So these are some basic SQLite operations that you can do inside the database. Insert the rows, delete those rows, update the values inside a table, or retrieve the row based on the conditions or criteria that you have given to the SQL. So this is some SQL query, and what you need to do is put select in here, and afterward put the columns that you want to get from your tables which are inside your database. After you have chosen the columns that you want to retrieve from the tables, make sure that you specify which table you want to get these columns, okay? And if you want to get these columns based on a condition or criteria, so you can use a where clause and put the column where clause, and based on the value, okay, so you can check the criteria in the where clause. Imagine that there is a table. So this is my table, and I want to get word and description based on the condition. So this is the query that I write. I choose word and description from word list table, or you can provide your table name in here and put the where clause. Based on the where conditions, you can get these columns. So now select those columns from table. Select the columns that you want to retrieve from your table to return your data, or you can put asterisk to return all columns for your table. Specify the table from which to get results. So this is the where clause, and you use this keyword for conditions to be met, and based on this condition you get your value. You first specify your column name and you put your value, and the condition has to be set in order to retrieve the values from the table. And you can use some common operators like equals, like, less than, or greater than. SQLite also supports and, order by, and limit. Select ID. So I want to retrieve only ID column from word list table, okay, and I want this ID based on a condition, I use where clause where word equals alpha and definition like ART, order by word, descending, and limit 1. So and or operators connect multiple conditions with logic operators, and order by order the return data based on the ascending or descending. You can also use limit to get a limited number of rows or results from the database. So this is just a simple query. If you want to get the whole data from your table, so make sure that you put asterisk before from, and after from specify the table you want to get its data. And if you want to get a specific column, so make sure that you put them after the select. And if you want to get these columns based on the conditions, so you can use the where clause where ID is greater than 2. So these are another more simple queries, and if you want to study them, make sure that you pause the video. As I've told you, it is a refresher or a short or a quick reference to SQLite or SQL queries. So this is it, another simple query, our last simple query that you can use. So now let's talk about the methods that you want to get your data from the table by using the SQLite database inside the Android. So the first method is raw query method. You can use this raw query method to get your data from your table, and inside this bracket you specify your query like select all from word list table, okay, and it requires two parameters, which is this one is a selection or where conditions that you put in here. Now remember that at this point, if things looks a little tricky about this, exactly what's going on and how things are working, don't worry too much about it. We will jump to Android Studio and we will make this simple app and try to understand exactly how database works and how this raw query works and how it returns our data. So make sure that you use the raw query with the SQLite object and you pass your query, which I have written here, and then the second parameter is nothing but it is a where clause that you use the where clause to get your data based on a specific condition. And if you do not want to use where condition, make sure that you pass null and write your query as simple like this. Select word definition from word list table where ID greater than placeholder. If you're from JDBC or Java background, you might have worked with these placeholders. We will cover about this also in the upcoming tutorials or in the next video. So the second parameter is the selection arguments, where you specify your arguments. And another method to retrieve or select your data from the tables that you have inside the database is query. Although you can also use raw query, the developer, I do not recommend you to use raw query until you have control over the data that you are writing to the database. So this is another method that you can retrieve your data, and it is similar to the raw query, but this method is in fashion these days and everyone uses this because it requires several parameters that you must specify in order to retrieve your data. So the first parameter of this query method is table. You must specify the table, from which table you want to retrieve your data, from which table you want to retrieve your data, and how many columns you want to retrieve, selection or where conditions, and you pass the values for this selection, and it requires group by, having, order by, and limit. If you see in here, I provide table. Table is nothing but it is a variable which holds my table name, word list table, and if you want to retrieve all the data from your table, so you must pass asterisk. And if I show the plain or raw query in here, you can see I said that select all from word list table where word equals to alpha, order by word, ascending, limit to 1. So how can you write this query inside this query method? You must write this like this, and we will work out a nice example about this query also. So let's talk about cursor, okay? When you are working with the query and raw query methods, it returns a result set or a subset of your table, so you must store them inside the cursor. Cursor is nothing but it is an object provides you read and write access to the result that is returned by a database query that you have written. Think of the cursor as a pointer to a table. So if you have written a query like select ID from this table, so it's going to return a table like this, which contains only ID. And in this column, there may be several values or several fields. So a cursor is a pointer like this, and it is always placed before the first row. If you want to get your data from these fields, so there are several methods that you need to call in order to move your cursor from one row to another row. I will also cover cover each and everything about the cursors, and we will be working out a nice example of it. If you want to learn more about SQLite database, make sure that you refer to the SQLite website and learn which kind of properties SQLite support, or which kind of properties other databases support and SQLite doesn't support them, because it is a scaled down version of those databases. And make sure that you study about query language in general, and also learn what is SQLite classes, what is cursor classes, or other things. So what's next? So we have learned the concept of SQLite primer in this video. So in the next video we will learn how to store our data inside the SQLite database by using Android Studio, because SQLite is an embedded database inside the Android operating system. So that's the end of this video. If you guys do like what you saw, make sure that you subscribe us and let us know your thoughts in the comment boxes below this video, and I will try to answer them ASAP, and I will answer them with the best of my ability with the information I haven't been given. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe us and hit the bell icons in order to get the latest video. So I'll catch you guys in the next video. Till next video, have fun learning. Peace out.